The moment a badge becomes more important than fairness, everyone standing nearby begins paying the price. At exactly 8:15 the following morning, Officer Ethan Walker stood silently inside Captain Daniel Brooks's office with his patrol cap tucked beneath one arm. The room felt unusually quiet. The framed commendations on the wall, the neatly arranged reports across the desk, and the steady ticking of the clock all seemed louder than normal. Captain Brooks looked at him for several long seconds before speaking in the calm, measured tone that every officer recognized. "Officer Walker, place your badge on my desk." Ethan blinked, convinced he had misunderstood. "Sir." Captain Brooks did not raise his voice. He did not show anger or disappointment. He simply repeated the instruction. "Place your badge on my desk. Your law enforcement authority is suspended pending the completion of the administrative order." Ethan slowly reached toward the silver badge attached to his uniform. For years, it had represented responsibility, trust, and service. This morning, it suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. He unclipped it carefully but hesitated before letting it leave his hand. Less than 14 hours earlier, he had finished his patrol believing he had handled another routine traffic stop. Now he stood in complete silence wondering how an ordinary evening had led to this moment. Imagine arriving at work expecting another normal shift only to discover that every decision you made yesterday had already changed your future. 14 hours earlier, the city had been settling into a quiet evening as commuters made their way home beneath the fading orange light of sunset. Officer Ethan Walker had been assigned to routine traffic enforcement along a suburban boulevard where the speed limit remained 35 miles per hour for several miles. The evening had been uneventful until he noticed a dark blue sedan roll through a stop sign without coming to a complete stop. It was a minor traffic violation, the kind that resulted in hundreds of routine stops every week across the country. Ethan activated his emergency lights, and the sedan immediately slowed before, pulling safely onto the shoulder. There was no hesitation, no sudden movement, and no attempt to leave the scene. As Ethan approached the driver's window, he found a young black woman waiting calmly with both hands resting visibly on the steering wheel. Before he said a single word, she greeted him politely. "Good evening, officer." Ethan introduced himself and explained the reason for the stop. The young woman listened carefully before apologizing for not stopping completely. When asked, she immediately provided her driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance without searching frantically or appearing nervous. Everything about the encounter seemed orderly, respectful, and cooperative. Her name was Olivia Carter. Ethan returned to his patrol vehicle and entered her information into the department computer. Within moments, the first records check began processing. He expected the stop to end with either a warning or a citation, just as countless others had throughout his career. Instead, something he could not explain caused him to hesitate before reaching for the citation book. He stared at the computer screen for another moment, then requested an additional records verification that extended a traffic stop which should have ended in only a few minutes. That single decision, made on an otherwise ordinary evening, quietly set into motion the chain of events that would follow him all the way to Captain Brooks's desk the next morning. The second records inquiry returned exactly what the first one had already shown. Olivia Carter possessed a valid driver's license, current vehicle registration, active insurance coverage, and no outstanding warrants. Her driving history revealed nothing beyond a few routine citations from years earlier, none of which suggested reckless behavior or criminal activity. The patrol computer displayed a clean record from top to bottom, leaving very little reason for the traffic stop to continue beyond issuing either a warning or a citation for failing to make a complete stop. Officer Ethan Walker studied the screen for another few seconds before closing the report, but instead of stepping out of his patrol vehicle with a completed citation, he requested another verification through dispatch. "Dispatch, can you confirm all returns on the operator one more time?" The dispatcher answered within moments. "Affirmative. Stand by." While waiting, Ethan glanced through the windshield toward Olivia's sedan. She remained exactly where she had been since the stop began, both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel, eyes facing forward, making no sudden movements and showing no signs of frustration despite the growing delay. Several passing drivers slowed briefly as they noticed the flashing patrol lights before continuing along the quiet boulevard. The evening traffic flowed normally around the scene while the minutes quietly accumulated. Dispatch returned on the radio with the same information. Operator information confirmed. Valid license. No wants. No warrants. Registration valid. Insurance valid. No additional alerts. Ethan acknowledged the transmission but remained seated. Something continued telling him the encounter should not end yet, even though every documented fact pointed in the opposite direction. After another moment, he stepped back toward the driver's window. Olivia lowered the window before he spoke. "Is everything all right, officer?" Her voice remained calm, respectful, and steady. "I have a few additional questions," Ethan replied. Olivia nodded politely. "Of course." He asked where she was coming from. She explained that she had been leaving a community youth mentoring event where she volunteered every Wednesday evening. He asked where she was heading. She answered that she was driving home after stopping to pick up groceries. Her responses came naturally, without hesitation or contradiction. Ethan looked briefly toward the grocery bags visible on the rear seat, then returned his attention to her. Nothing inside the vehicle appeared unusual. The interior was organized, clean, and entirely consistent with what she had described. Even so, Ethan found himself searching for something that would justify extending the encounter. Olivia noticed the silence but never challenged his authority. Instead, she simply waited with remarkable patience, understanding that remaining cooperative was the fastest way to resolve the situation. After another pause, Ethan informed dispatch that he wanted a field supervisor to respond to the location. Captain Daniel Brooks acknowledged the request and advised that he was only a few minutes away. Olivia listened quietly as the radio transmission echoed through the evening air. She did not ask why a supervisor had been requested. She did not complain that the stop had already lasted far longer than expected. She simply looked toward Ethan and said softly, "Officer, I hope whatever concerns you have can be answered by the facts." Ethan offered no response. As the distant headlights of Captain Brooks's patrol vehicle began approaching from the opposite end of the boulevard, the routine traffic stop quietly crossed an invisible line where evidence had already provided every answer, but assumptions were beginning to ask entirely different questions. Captain Daniel Brooks arrived less than 3 minutes later, parking his marked patrol vehicle several yards behind Ethan Walker's cruiser. The flashing emergency lights reflected softly across the quiet boulevard as he stepped out and walked toward Ethan with the calm confidence of someone who had handled thousands of traffic stops throughout his career. Before approaching the driver, he asked a simple question. "What have you got?" Ethan handed over the driver's information and quietly explained that something about the encounter did not feel right. Even though every records check had returned clean, Captain Brooks reviewed the documents one by one before looking back toward Ethan. "Tell me what objective facts support extending this stop." Ethan hesitated. "Nothing specific, sir. I just believe there is more here." Brooks remained composed. "Belief is not evidence. We deal with facts." Without raising his voice or criticizing Ethan in front of the driver, he suggested speaking directly with Olivia once more, so the situation could be resolved professionally. The two officers approached the sedan together. Olivia lowered her window again before either officer spoke. "Good evening, Captain," she said politely after noticing the rank insignia on his uniform. Brooks introduced himself and explained that he wanted to ensure everything was being handled correctly. "Miss Carter, have you been cooperative throughout this encounter?" Olivia answered without hesitation. "Yes, sir. I have provided every document requested and answered every question." Brooks nodded. "Has Officer Walker explained the reason for the original stop?" "Yes, sir. I did not come to a complete stop at the sign, and I understand that." Brooks appreciated both her honesty and her respectful tone. He then asked if there was anything else about the encounter she believed was important for him to know. Olivia paused for a brief moment before answering carefully. "Only that I have tried to remain patient because I believe the process matters. My father has always taught me that respect for the law begins with respecting lawful procedure." Brooks looked at her with quiet curiosity. Your father works in law enforcement? Olivia smiled politely but without any sign of pride or expectation. Yes, sir, he does. But I would rather not involve him. I believe this situation should be resolved the same way it would be for anyone else. Brooks gave a slight nod. That is a fair answer. As the conversation ended, Ethan stood silently beside his captain, still unable to identify a single objective fact supporting additional action. At that exact moment, the dispatch radio broke the evening silence. Unit 12. Additional information available regarding the registered residents connected to the operator. Supervisor notification recommended. Brooks acknowledged the transmission and requested the information be delivered through the secure law enforcement channel. A few quiet seconds passed before the encrypted message appeared on the mobile computer inside the patrol vehicle. Brooks read the notification once, then read it again to ensure he had not misunderstood what was displayed on the screen. Without changing his expression, he slowly closed the computer and turned toward Ethan. The atmosphere around the roadside shifted almost imperceptibly. Nothing about the traffic violation had changed. Nothing about Olivia's cooperation had changed. But the next administrative notification was about to reveal that the woman patiently waiting inside the sedan was connected to someone whose name every officer in the department recognized. And from that moment forward, every decision made beside that quiet suburban road would be examined with complete transparency rather than unquestioned assumption. Captain Daniel Brooks walked back toward his patrol vehicle without saying a word, his expression calm but noticeably more deliberate than before. Inside the vehicle, the secure mobile computer displayed the administrative notification in plain language. The registered residential address associated with Olivia Carter belonged to Police Chief Marcus Carter. Brooks remained still for a moment before closing the message and taking a slow breath. He understood immediately that the notification changed neither the facts nor the officer's responsibilities. It only guaranteed that every decision made from this point forward would receive extraordinary scrutiny. He stepped back onto the shoulder where Ethan Walker was waiting. The registered address belongs to the residence of Police Chief Marcus Carter, Brooks said quietly. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, but before he could respond, Brooks continued. That information changes absolutely nothing about how we handle this stop. We follow policy, we document facts, and we treat Miss Carter exactly as we would treat anyone else. Ethan nodded. Although uncertainty had begun replacing the confidence he displayed only minutes earlier. Brooks then contacted dispatch through the secure channel. Notify command according to Executive Family Notification Policy. Advise that the involved officer is not requesting command response. This remains an administrative notification only. Dispatch acknowledged immediately. Several minutes later, the notification reached Police Chief Marcus Carter, who was still finishing paperwork inside headquarters after a community meeting. The communications supervisor explained that his daughter had been involved in a routine traffic stop and that department policy required notification because the incident involved an immediate family member of the chief of police. Marcus listened without interrupting. His first question was simple. Is my daughter safe? The supervisor answered, Yes, Chief. Marcus asked a second question. Has anyone reported injuries or requested medical assistance? No, Chief. He remained silent for a brief moment before giving his instructions. Document that I am formally recusing myself from every aspect of this incident. The deputy chief will assume all administrative authority regarding this matter. I do not want updates unless there is a public safety emergency. Department policy applies exactly as written. The communications supervisor acknowledged the order, and within moments the formal recusal was entered into the department record system. Back on the roadside, Brooks approached Olivia once again. Miss Carter, department policy required an administrative notification because of your family relationship. Your father has officially removed himself from every decision involving this stop. Olivia lowered her eyes for a moment before quietly smiling. That sounds like him. Brooks looked at her curiously. You expected that? She nodded. My father has always told me that the badge belongs to the public before it belongs to the officer wearing it. If he ever used his position to protect me from a lawful process, everything he taught me would lose its meaning. Brooks respected the answer. It carried neither resentment nor pride, only quiet confidence in the principles her father had spent decades defending. Ethan remained nearby, listening to every word. The realization slowly settled over him that neither Olivia nor her father had attempted to influence the outcome in any way. They had trusted the process completely. As evening shadows stretched farther across the boulevard, the flashing patrol lights continued reflecting against the pavement, but the atmosphere had changed entirely. The traffic violation remained minor, Olivia remained cooperative, and the law remained exactly the same. The only difference was that every decision made after this moment would be preserved under a level of administrative review that left no room for opinion when the evidence finally spoke for itself. Captain Daniel Brooks looked from Olivia Carter to Officer Ethan Walker before making the decision that would quietly shape everything that followed. "Miss Carter," he said in an even voice, "thank you for your patience. At this point, I am concluding the roadside portion of this stop." Olivia nodded respectfully, expecting the encounter to finally end. Brooks returned her driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance before explaining that the original traffic violation would be addressed with a written warning. She accepted the documents with a calm smile. "Thank you, Captain." Before she closed the window, Brooks added one final statement. "Department policy also requires that all documentation connected to this incident be preserved through the normal administrative process. That procedure protects everyone involved, including you and every officer present tonight." Olivia acknowledged the explanation without asking another question. "I understand." She started the engine but remained parked while Brooks stepped back toward Ethan. The captain's expression was neither angry nor emotional. It reflected the professionalism expected from someone responsible for protecting both the public and the integrity of the department. "Officer Walker," Brooks said quietly, "the stop is complete. Begin documenting everything exactly as it occurred. Do not summarize. Do not speculate. Record only what you personally observed." Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." Brooks continued. "Your body camera recording will be preserved automatically. My recording will also be preserved. Dispatch audio, patrol vehicle camera footage, computer activity logs, and every records inquiry generated during the stop will remain attached to the incident file. Nothing will be removed and nothing will be excluded." Ethan felt a growing weight settle over him. During the stop, those systems had simply been routine equipment. Now they seemed more like silent witnesses that had documented every decision second by second. Brooks noticed the change in Ethan's expression. "This is not a punishment," he explained. "It is standard procedure whenever an incident involves the immediate family member of an executive officer. The purpose is transparency." Ethan quietly replied, "Understood." A few moments later, Olivia carefully pulled away from the shoulder and merged back into the evening traffic. She did not look back. She did not make a telephone call from the roadside. She did not ask anyone to intervene. Within seconds, her sedan disappeared beyond the next intersection, leaving only the flashing patrol lights illuminating the empty shoulder. Brooks watched the vehicle until it was completely out of sight before speaking again. "Do you understand why preserving evidence matters?" Ethan answered honestly, "Because everyone deserves an accurate record." Brooks gave a slight nod. "Exactly. Evidence protects good officers just as much as it protects the public. It does not choose sides. It simply remembers." The two officers returned to their patrol vehicles and completed the remaining administrative tasks before clearing the call. As Ethan entered the first report into the department computer, he realized how ordinary each individual action had seemed while the stop was unfolding. Every radio transmission, every records inquiry, every minute that passed, and every conversation had felt routine at the time. Yet together they had created a complete digital timeline that could not be changed after the fact. Somewhere inside headquarters, the administrative notification generated by department policy had already linked the incident to a formal review process. Ethan could not see it happening, but the system had already begun gathering the body camera recordings, dispatch logs, computer records, and supervisor documentation into a single evidence file. By the time the patrol shift ended and the city settled into the quiet hours before sunrise, the strongest witness to everything that had happened was no longer any individual officer or driver. It was the complete and unbroken record created by the department's own technology, patiently waiting for the morning when every decision would be measured against the facts rather than remembered through opinion. The city was still covered by the pale light of early morning when the Professional Standards Unit began assembling the complete administrative record connected to the previous night's traffic stop. Inside a secure conference room at headquarters, investigators gathered around a large table where printed reports rested beside laptop computers displaying synchronized digital evidence. No one entered the room expecting a dramatic revelation. Their responsibility was much simpler than that. They were there to determine whether every decision made during the stop complied with department policy and whether each action could be supported by objective facts rather than personal assumptions. The evidence collection process had already been completed automatically before sunrise. Body camera recordings from both officers had been securely archived. Dashboard camera footage from the patrol vehicles had been preserved without interruption. Dispatch radio communications, computer-aided dispatch records, mobile computer activity logs, records inquiries, supervisor notifications, and every electronic timestamp had been organized into a single administrative file. The technology recorded events exactly as they occurred, without preference, opinion, or emotion. Meanwhile, Officer Ethan Walker sat alone outside the conference room after reporting to headquarters as instructed. He watched investigators quietly carrying folders from one office to another while trying to convince himself that the review would simply confirm he had exercised caution. Yet Captain Daniel Brooks's words continued echoing inside his mind. "We deal with facts, not beliefs." Ethan replayed the stop over and over, searching for one objective observation that had justified extending the encounter after every records inquiry returned clear. Each time he reached the same uncomfortable silence. Inside the conference room, the deputy chief officially opened the review after confirming once again that Police Chief Marcus Carter remained fully recused from every stage of the investigation. "This review concerns conduct only," he stated. "Relationships, titles, and personal opinions have no place in our findings. We will evaluate documented actions against department policy." The first recording began playing. Across the large monitor, investigators watched Ethan initiate the traffic stop for the observed violation. They watched Olivia Carter immediately pull over safely, keep both hands visible, answer every question respectfully, and provide valid identification without hesitation. The recording continued exactly as it had happened. Each records inquiry produced the same result. Valid driver's license, valid registration, active insurance, no outstanding warrants, no criminal alerts, no conflicting information. The synchronized timeline displayed every radio transmission beside every body camera frame. One investigator quietly compared the elapsed minutes against departmental guidance for routine traffic enforcement. Another reviewed the computer logs showing the additional verification requests. Captain Brooks's arrival appeared next, followed by his repeated questions asking Ethan to identify objective facts supporting the prolonged detention. The room remained remarkably quiet because the recording spoke more clearly than any witness could. Nobody interrupted the video. Nobody speculated about intentions. They simply observed the sequence exactly as it unfolded. When the secure dispatch notification identifying Olivia's residence as the home of Police Chief Marcus Carter appeared in the timeline, another investigator immediately advanced to the next recording. There they watched Brooks remind everyone that the notification changed nothing about the legal standards governing the stop. Moments later, the evidence confirmed that Marcus Carter formally removed himself from the process instead of becoming involved. The deputy chief slowly closed one report before looking around the conference table. "So far," he said calmly, "the evidence tells one consistent story. Every system recorded the same events. Now our responsibility is to determine whether every decision remained supported by facts from beginning to end." Outside the conference room, Ethan looked toward the closed door and finally understood that the review no longer depended upon memory. It depended upon a complete digital record that had quietly documented every choice from the instant his emergency. Lights illuminated the roadside until the moment Olivia drove away. Officer Ethan Walker remained seated outside the professional standards conference room while the review continued behind closed doors. Every passing minute felt longer than the traffic stop itself. Investigators entered and exited quietly, carrying reports, policy manuals, and evidence summaries without revealing a single expression that might suggest how the review was unfolding. Ethan stared at the polished hallway floor, replaying every conversation from the previous evening. The stop had begun with a simple traffic violation, yet it had grown into something far larger because of choices that now seemed impossible to explain with the certainty he had felt at the time. Shortly after 8 o'clock, Captain Daniel Brooks stepped through the conference room door and motioned for Ethan to come inside. The atmosphere remained calm, professional, and free of emotion. The deputy chief welcomed Ethan before explaining the purpose of the interview. Officer Walker, this administrative interview is intended to understand the reasoning behind your decisions. We are interested in documented facts, not assumptions. Please answer each question honestly. Ethan nodded. Yes, sir. One investigator opened the incident report while another synchronized the body camera recording with the dispatch timeline displayed on a large monitor. The deputy chief began with the simplest question. What was the lawful basis for initiating the traffic stop? Ethan answered confidently. The driver failed to make a complete stop at a stop sign. Did the driver immediately comply with your emergency lights? Yes. Did she provide valid identification, registration, and proof of insurance? Yes. Did any records inquiry reveal outstanding warrants, criminal alerts, conflicting identification, or any objective indication of criminal activity? Ethan looked briefly toward the monitor before answering. No, sir. The investigator allowed the body camera recording to continue playing. Olivia Carter remained respectful, cooperative, and patient throughout the encounter. Every response matched the statements documented in the written reports. Captain Brooks's questions also appeared exactly as everyone remembered them. What objective facts support extending this stop? The recording captured several seconds of silence before Ethan responded that something simply did not feel right. The investigator paused the video. Officer Walker, he asked calmly, after receiving confirmation that every records inquiry was clear, and after your supervisor requested objective facts, what specific evidence supported continuing the detention beyond the original traffic enforcement purpose? Ethan searched his memory once again. The answer that had seemed obvious the previous evening no longer existed when measured against the recording. After several quiet moments, he spoke honestly. I cannot identify an objective fact that justified extending the stop after the records checks were completed. No one reacted emotionally. The deputy chief simply wrote another note before continuing. Department policy requires articulable facts to support additional investigative actions. Personal instinct alone does not satisfy that requirement. Ethan slowly lowered his eyes. Hearing the policy read aloud while watching the encounter unfold exactly as it happened forced him to recognize the difference between caution supported by evidence and suspicion unsupported by facts. Captain Brooks remained silent until the questioning ended. Then he addressed Ethan directly. Every officer faces moments where judgment is tested. Professional integrity is measured by whether we allow evidence to guide our decisions instead of allowing our decisions to search for evidence afterward. Ethan accepted the statement without argument because he finally understood its meaning. As the interview concluded, investigators organized their findings for the command review, while across headquarters Police Chief Marcus Carter continued honoring his formal recusal without requesting updates or attempting to influence the outcome in any way. The investigation no longer depended upon titles, opinions, or personal relationships. It depended entirely upon a complete record that showed every decision in the exact order it had been made, leaving the evidence to determine where responsibility truly belonged. By late morning, the administrative review entered its final stage. Every recording had been examined, every report had been compared, and every policy reference had been matched against the documented decisions made during the previous evening. Inside the command conference room, The deputy chief carefully reviewed the completed findings while members of the professional standards unit sat quietly around the table. Captain Daniel Brooks remained present as both the reporting supervisor and a witness to the events. Police Chief Marcus Carter was not there. His formal recusal remained fully in effect, exactly as department policy required. The deputy chief looked around the room before speaking. This review concerns documented conduct. We will reach our conclusion based only upon evidence, department policy, and the established timeline. An investigator projected the synchronized digital record onto the large display. Body camera footage, dashboard camera recordings, dispatch communications, computer-aided dispatch records, mobile computer activity logs, supervisor notifications, and written reports all aligned perfectly. Every source confirmed the same sequence of events. The original traffic stop was lawful because of the observed traffic violation. Olivia Carter immediately complied with the emergency lights. She remained respectful throughout the encounter. Her driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance were all valid. Every database inquiry returned without warrants, criminal alerts, or conflicting information. The investigators continued comparing the timeline against departmental standards governing routine traffic enforcement. One conclusion became increasingly difficult to ignore. After the legitimate purpose of the stop had been satisfied, no objectively articulable facts appeared in the record supporting the continued extension of the encounter. Captain Brooks quietly added his own observation. During the stop, I asked Officer Walker more than once to identify objective facts supporting additional investigative action. None were presented. The deputy chief slowly nodded before reviewing the applicable department policy one final time. After several moments of careful consideration, he signed the administrative findings and placed the completed document on the table. Based upon the totality of the evidence, the review concludes that Officer Ethan Walker failed to maintain the objective standards required for continued enforcement action after the lawful purpose of the stop had been resolved. His decisions were not adequately supported by articulable facts as required under department policy. The room remained silent. Nobody celebrated. Nobody expressed satisfaction. Administrative accountability was never treated as a personal victory. It represented the department honoring the same professional standards expected of every officer regardless of rank, reputation, or years of service. A short time later, Ethan entered Captain Brooks's office after receiving instructions to report there. The atmosphere felt strikingly familiar because it was the very same office where the story had begun. Captain Brooks stood behind his desk with the signed administrative order resting beside a sealed evidence envelope. He looked directly at Ethan before speaking. This decision was reached because of documented evidence. It was not influenced by Miss Carter, her father, or anyone else. Ethan listened quietly before giving a slow nod. I understand. Brooks continued. The recordings preserved every decision. The reports confirmed the timeline. The evidence remained consistent from beginning to end. Ethan reached toward the silver badge attached to the front of his uniform. He carefully unclipped it and held it in his hand for several long seconds. For years, it had represented the public trust placed in him. Now it reminded him that trust depends upon judgment as much as authority. Without saying another word, he placed the badge into Captain Brooks's open hand. Neither man attempted to break the silence because nothing further needed to be explained. Outside the office window, patrol officers prepared to begin another day of serving the community. Ethan quietly watched them for a final moment before turning toward the door, fully understanding that he had not lost his badge inside the captain's office that morning. He had begun losing it the previous evening when assumptions remained after the facts had already answered every question the law required. 6 months passed, yet the events of that quiet evening continued shaping decisions inside the department long after the paperwork had been archived. The administrative investigation had been officially closed, the evidence securely stored, and the findings entered into the department's permanent training records. What remained was not a story about one officer or one driver. It became a lesson about the responsibility carried by every badge and the importance of allowing evidence to lead every decision. Inside the police academy, A new class of recruits gathered inside a training room where instructors regularly presented real incidents demonstrating professional judgment. On the large screen appeared carefully selected portions of the body camera recordings, dispatch communications, and administrative timeline from the traffic stop. Before pressing play, the instructor addressed the room with a simple reminder. Do not focus on names. Focus on decisions. The recruits watched Officer Ethan Walker initiate a lawful traffic stop for a minor violation. They watched Olivia Carter immediately comply, remain respectful, provide valid identification, and cooperate without hesitation. They watched every records inquiry confirm exactly the same information. Then they watched the encounter continue after the lawful purpose of the stop had already been resolved. When the recording reached Captain Daniel Brooks asking what objective facts supported additional investigative action, the instructor paused the video. He looked across the classroom before asking a single question. At this exact moment, what evidence justified extending the stop? The room became completely silent until one recruit quietly answered, "None." The instructor nodded. That silence is the most important lesson in this case. Professional judgment begins where assumptions end. Across the city, Olivia Carter continued living the same life she had lived before the incident. She returned every week to mentoring young students, completed her university education, and politely declined every invitation to speak publicly about the traffic stop. Friends occasionally asked whether she felt angry about what had happened, but she always gave the same answer. I wanted fairness, not revenge. Police Chief Marcus Carter continued leading the department with the same quiet integrity that had defined his career for decades. He never discussed the investigation publicly, never criticized the officers involved, and never referred to his daughter's experience during command meetings. Instead, he reminded supervisors that accountability only earns public trust when leaders accept the very same standards expected of everyone else. Captain Daniel Brooks also carried the experience into every leadership session with younger officers. Authority allows you to enforce the law, he often said, but fairness is what allows the community to trust you while you do it. Those words carried unusual weight because everyone in the room understood they had been proven by real events rather than hypothetical training scenarios. As for Ethan Walker, he quietly accepted the consequences of his decisions without attempting to blame department policy, his supervisors, or anyone else. Looking back, he realized the investigation had never been influenced by the identity of the driver or the position held by her father. It had been guided entirely by recordings, documentation, timelines, and evidence that treated every person equally. In the end, the most powerful voice had never belonged to a police chief, a supervisor, or even an officer wearing a badge. It belonged to the truth preserved one decision at a time. Imagine standing on a quiet roadside believing that experience alone is enough, only to discover that justice asks for something greater. It asks every officer to place facts before assumptions, integrity before pride, and fairness before power. Because a badge may represent authority for a single shift, but character is what earns the public's trust for a lifetime.